Happy New Year to you all. It's been quite 2020. Unprecedented events, 3 national lockdowns. These have all combined to catapult digital fundraising to the forefront of activity and investment by charities. So what better to start this season with a look at top 5 digital fundraising trends with Matt Smith of the think tank consulting group. A very warm welcome to you all. I'm Neil Kennedy, Vice Chair of the Chartered Institute Fundraising South East and London Regional Group. The Chartered Institute Fundraising is the recognised membership body for fundraisers in the UK. Our purpose is to champion excellence in fundraising through personal development, education and networking to serve our communities and causes both now and in the future. I'd particularly like to thank you all for joining us this morning, and in particular I would like to thank our First Thursday team, all our volunteers, and I'd like to pay tribute to the incredible work they've done over the last year in transferring First Thursday from a staged event to online live event. Really an incredible amount of work and really fantastic by all of them. We're always looking for new committee members and also speakers. So if anyone would like to try one of those, please contact us. I'd very much like to thank once again our sponsors, Eden Brown, who over the years have contributed enormously to many of our activities and have been central in a lot of our work. They're here, they can help you personally, either to find a job, move job, or indeed recruit on your behalf. I see that many of you still are not members of this new Chartered Institute fundraising, so we have an incredible offer still going for a membership discount of £44 in your first year. To take advantage of that, please use the membership discount code, which is LDN/group. That's LDN/group on your application, your membership application form. We'd like you to tweet, if possible. It's hashtag CIOF Thursday. That's hashtag CIOF Thursday. And tag us at hashtag CIOFSE London. It's a bit of a mouthful. That's hashtag CIOFSE London. And finally, we are recording this event, so if you wish to anonymise, please do so now. Thank you. I'll hand you over to Stephen now and come back to you later on. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, just a few house rules. So everyone's going to be on mute for this session, but while Matt is talking, we really do encourage you to use the chat function to add as many questions as possible. So if you can just add them into the box and we will answer as many as possible in the order that they come in. So I will hand over to Matt at this point, and yeah, really look forward to it.
Sorry, shall I just introduce you, Matt? It's my pleasure to introduce Matt, our speaker today. Matt Smith is from the think tank Consulting Solutions Group. He has 10 years experience in the sector, skilled very much in innovation, new product development and digital fundraising, as well as extensive experience in the sector as a whole. During his career, he's worked with several leading charities, Mind, Age UK, NSPCC, Leonard Cheshire, WaterAid, more recently Marie Curie, and he is both a director as well as a consultant for brain tumour research. Please welcome Matt Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. What an introduction. Good morning, everybody, from a very rainy and quite grey Brixton in South London. I hope you're all well. Before we get started, it's been obviously a really difficult start to the year. So before I get into the content, I wish you and your family and all of your teams well. I hope everyone is healthy and happy. Today, I am going to be talking about the top 5 digital trends for us to keep an eye on for 2021. As is always my style, I'm going to be quite ambitious with what I want to try and cover in 20 minutes. So I will be talking at quite a pace, but obviously this is going to be recorded. I'm very happy for the slides to be shared with everybody, but perhaps we can get into a bit more detail in the Q&A afterwards. So the top 5 things I'm going to be talking about over the next 20 minutes or so are virtual events and how they're here to stay, not just for 2021, but beyond. circular journeys on Facebook, and why that is one of the big trends to be getting on board with right now. Digital replacing physical cash and physical engagement, and what that means for our sector. Next, we'll look at generational shifts in giving, and why I think thinking about how we're communicating with the different generations is particularly important at the moment. And then lastly, and tied to that fourth point, we'll be looking at the brand new wave of content that's come into the sector, and something to look at over 2021. So without further ado, let's dive in. So the first trend for the year is virtual events. Now, obviously, during this period of change and challenge, we've really relied on virtual events as a sector. And I think, not to be too pessimistic, but I think we're going to be seeing that challenge, we're going to be seeing that disruption throughout the rest of 2021 and likely into 2022. My personal opinion is I still think it's quite ambitious to be planning in-person mass participation physical events for the September and October window. I think at the very earliest we'll be seeing in-person events is that point, but I still think there's a long road to go before we get there. So if you're looking to make a case to your board, to your senior colleagues around investing in virtual events, building out your virtual event content, these are some of the benefits that I think you need to be pushing. Supporters not being restricted to the when and the where. It's accessible, they're accessible to a much broader audience. Virtual events are obviously better for the environment, gives you the ability to engage with a younger audience. And that's a point that we'll come back to later on in the presentation. However, there are challenges too. On average, we do see lower amounts raised when comparing virtual to physical. Participants don't necessarily mean fundraisers. So one of the trends we're seeing at the moment is large numbers of signups to virtual events, but not necessarily the same conversion rates to fundraising that we see with physical events. They still require a decent level of digital skill. And there may also be a disconnect between the activity and the cause, and therefore lead towards a loss of tangible physical interaction with supporters. I encourage you all to download the excellent virtual fundraising monitor from Massive and Blackboard. And there are a few key stats that I wanted to pick out from the last year of virtual event fundraising. So in 2020, 60% of charities did some form of virtual event fundraising. This was a survey of 150 different virtual events that covered 1.8 million participants taking part in a virtual event, raising over £60 million. It was interesting to see is that 45% of those events were new and 38% were pivots from physical to virtual. The last point here that I'd like to make is that median fundraising value per event was at £33,000. What's interesting is only a small percentage, only 5% of virtual events last year raised more than £1 million. So what we're seeing is this model be used for small, medium and large charities up and down the country. I'd like to pick out a few particularly strong examples from the sector last year. These are all obviously from medium to large size charities, but I think it's helpful to give a couple of case studies for you to go away and have a look at. One in particular that I liked was Teenage Cancer Trust's press up challenge, because it was just so simple. It was literally set yourself a press up target each day and make sure you continue along with that for the duration of the month. They raised almost £700,000 from something that's quite so simple. Obviously, other great examples on here as well that I'd encourage you to go to take a look at. And the beauty of the virtual event model is that we can replicate this whether you've got a large budget or a small budget. What's interesting about the last 12 months is how much some of the big platforms have invested in virtual events and virtual event fundraising. In particular, I think about Just Giving and the work that they've done with Strava integration. So being able to count your steps, count your running miles, count your cycling miles, and have them add to your Just Giving page. We've also seen a big push towards live streaming and live stream fundraising. I think there was a moment last year in April where my mum WhatsApped me to tell me that she was attending a live stream charity pub quiz that evening. And that was one of the more remarkable texts I've ever received from my mum. The fact that she knew what a live stream was and was about to attend one was quite the revelation. But what we've seen obviously is Just Giving improve their integration. You can now embed Twitch live streams and YouTube live streams directly onto a Just Giving page, which is greatly enhanced the interactivity and engagement you can do on Just Giving. Also entering the marketplace, obviously, over the last 18 months has been a US company called Tiltify. And they're a really excellent addition to the live stream fundraising market, more of whom I'll talk about in a second. That moves us on to the second big trend I think we need to keep an eye on for 2021. And that's the Facebook circular journey. So I'm going to try and give you all some concrete actions to take away. I would definitely, if you've not, have a conversation with the guys over at Give Panel, because I think some of the work they're doing at the moment in terms of making Facebook really sing for charities up and down the country, it has been excellent. So the Facebook circular journey, as described here by the Magic 3. So you attract people through your Facebook ad, you drive them to join a Facebook group, and within the Facebook group, you then get them to commit to fundraise for your charity. It's just as simple as that, but we're starting to see this model really explode. So here's an example from Brain Tumor Research, where I'm currently interim director of fundraising. I won't take you through every single step in detail, but this shows the kind of circular journey that you can take people on Facebook and have them never leave the platform. It's really powerful, because it kind of traps people on the platform. You take them through advert, through the Facebook group, and into fundraising. To give you an example of how successful this has been at Brain Tumor Research, we're currently putting together a walking event for February. It's the classic walk 10,000 steps every day in February. We launched our marketing in the first week of January. We already have over 6,000 registrations and have already raised over £50,000 from less than a £5,000 spend. It really goes to show that the return of investment you can get from these Facebook circular challenges is really powerful. So I would encourage you, if you're already not, to investigate this Facebook challenge model, because it can be set up for very little cost and can have a real return of investment. A couple of key principles, I guess, to think about if you are looking to do a Facebook challenge or have one running at the moment. From what we can tell, the simpler and more straightforward you keep the event name and keep the concept, the more powerful it will be. Walk 10,000 steps every day in February being a classic example of something that is very simple, grabs your audience attention, and is not complex in any way. What's interesting about the Facebook challenge kind of model is that keeping your branding and cause messaging out of the ads seems to be more powerful. If you bring in your brand, bring in your cause messaging later on in stewardship, seems to be much more effective. One of the key things is merchandise or exclusive content. So for the Walk 10,000 Steps idea, the charity is offering a free t-shirt for everyone that hits a certain fundraising amount. The incentive, the merchandise, is key to making this work and key to building out your Facebook group. And lastly, making sure that you're allocating enough time and effort to get the group going. Facebook groups don't just moderate and moderate themselves. You need to be able to build that momentum. That takes staff time, whether that's paid staff or volunteer time, to really make it work. So moving on to trend number 3. This is something that we were monitoring before the pandemic, and that's the disappearance of physical cash in the economy. So this graph from UK Finance plots cash payments declining over time, being replaced by debit card and smartphone payments. Now, our expectation and what we're seeing from the data that we've got to hand is that coronavirus is expediting this, that physical cash, physical notes, physical coins are massively are reducing massively in the marketplace, being replaced by direct card, direct smartphone payments. Now that has some interesting implications for our sector as a whole. Obviously, it will have an impact on cash collections. Obviously, it will have an impact on community and events fundraising. But fortunately, there are a few solutions now on the market that we need to take a closer look at as we come out of the pandemic and start to do more face-to-face fundraising. So a couple of suppliers for you all to have a look at. And when it comes to contactless card terminals, the two big providers on the market are Goodbox and Liberty Pay, and they offer a range of different price terminals that you can then take out to your cash collections, take out to your community and events to be able to replace physical cash. On the right, you'll see an example of a near field communication badge, this one being used for the Movember campaign. Now, near field communication uses very similar technology to what's used in Oyster cards and other travel cards. And again, it connects with your smartphone, so you're able to put the near field communication in a badge or a sticker or another piece of merchandise. And then with a smartphone in close proximity to it, you're able to send your supporters out to a web page, out to a donation form. There are two examples that I think the sector can be using for those moments where we're worried about physical coins, physical notes not being in the marketplace anymore. What's interesting as well is I think there's going to be an ongoing nervousness around being handed almost anything, whether that's a leaflet, a menu, pieces of merchandise. So I think we need to think about other ways to be able to interact with our supporters that don't involve handing people things. So our good friend, the QR code, has had quite a moment the last 12 months. If you had told me 3 or 4 years ago that QR codes would be in the window of every premises in the UK, I would not have believed you. They're back, and I think they're here to stay for at least the duration of the next couple of years. These are a couple of examples of how Just Giving have integrated this technology. So now in the background of the back end of every Just Giving page, there is now a QR code that a supporter can use to direct people directly to their Just Giving page. A lot of this technology, QR code technology, is free to access, and even smaller charities with smaller budgets can harness this QR code technology. A simple Google of QR code creators is an effective way to add this to your posters, to your flyers, and to your merchandise. The example on the right is it shows how Just Giving have integrated some of the new power of open banking. So this is a donation I made to a local charity a couple of months ago. I timed myself. It took me 27 seconds to make this donation. So I'm a Barclays Bank customer, and I have my Barclays banking app set up on my phone with my Apple Pay all set up. Now that Just Giving have integrated this bank transfer, it means you can make those really, really fast Apple Pay and Android Pay donations through Just Giving directly. I think we're getting closer as a sector to the payment and donation experience that you'd expect from a Deliveroo, from an Uber. We're speeding up that process, and it's a welcome move by Just Giving to integrate the bank transfer. So the fourth trend I wanted to talk about was the generational shift in giving and kind of what that means for the sector as a whole. So again, another report I'd really encourage you to download is Blackboard's The Next Generation of UK Giving. And what this tells us is there are broadly 4 big generations in the marketplace at the moment, four generations that have disposable income. The retired generation, the baby boomer generation, the Gen X generation, and then however you decide to class it, the millennial generation Y, generation Z generation. What's interesting is, as you see on the pie chart on the left here, is broadly speaking, in terms of contribution to total giving, those generations give in a pretty even way. I'd like to dispel one myth that the millennial generation Z generation is actually slightly more generous than the other generations at the moment. If you look across to the bar chart on the right, you'll see why it's important to think about the different ways that these generations are giving. So that mature audience, that retired audience, is far more likely to give direct donations. 51% of how they give is directly through donations. As you break that down through the younger generations, you'll start to see how that compares to that top bar, the millennial generation, how they're far more likely to give in a variety of different ways, where's that peer-to-peer giving, where it's word of mouth giving, and just a quarter of that generation are giving direct cash. So it's an interesting comparison when you sort of break that down through the generations. It means we need to start thinking about what we're offering our different age supporters, and then thinking about the giving channels used by each generation. Again, we'll be sharing these slides so you can kind of zoom into the numbers if they're slightly too small here. But what's interesting is comparing channels across generations. So on the far right, you can see that mature, that retired generation. They're far more likely to give via a mailing, far more likely to give through street canvassing. But then if you move across to the left, as the generations get younger, you start to see more event fundraising, more social media fundraising. And it's an interesting point of comparison, sort of see which channels we're speaking to each generation. In sort of my personal experience of the charities that I work with, I don't think enough is being done to engage with and to build momentum with younger generations. For the most part, we're still quite trapped in that female 55+ audience. And we're going to be facing a bit of a cliff edge moment at some point if we don't start to do more engagement with younger audiences. And the last point on that generational shift in giving is, of course, thinking about what that means via mobile device. And I would encourage to download this Blackboard report, because there's even more information in there about what this means for us. But obviously, younger generations are far more likely to engage across computer, tablet and smartphone. My hunch is that we would have seen this shift somewhat over the last 12 months, as we've seen what I would describe as a digital re-education of the public at large. That example that I gave of my mum now knowing what a live stream is, knowing what a QR code is, that's been pretty universal across the board. So we will start to see, you know, these numbers shift across the generations. But if we're not making things mobile first, if we're not giving Gen Xers and the millennial generations the opportunity to be able to engage and donate to our causes via mobile first, then we're going to be missing out. And a few examples now of kind of trend number 5 that I think we need to monitor, and how that ties into the generational shift. Some ideas around new types of content, new platforms that are coming into the market. For me, I think there are two things I'm worried about. There's that generational shift that I just spoke about, but then there's also our hyper reliance on the first generation of social media. So I'm quite scared by how reliant the sector at the moment is on Facebook as a channel. And I know this is kind of counterintuitive to the second trend, because the Facebook fundraising is working so well for us at the moment. But I do think we slowly need to diversify some of the channels and platforms that we're utilizing to be able to take some of that burden, some of that pressure that we're putting on Facebook off of ourselves. As I mentioned earlier, Tiltify have entered the UK fundraising market over the last 18 months and provide a really excellent live streaming fundraising platform. So a lot of the pub quizzes that charities have held over the last 12 months have been streamed directly live on Tiltify. They do a really good job of integrating milestones and merchandise, and they've been really thinking about different giving methods that they can offer the sector. So they've just integrated monthly giving, and I think it's just a clear sign that the platform is looking at the UK market and coming up with new ideas all the time. Next, I think we'll start to see Spotify play a larger role in the sector as a whole. So whereas at the moment, if we're talking about 70–80% of our digital marketing spend is going through Facebook, I think we'll start to see channels like Spotify start to eat into that. So their ad building tool is very user friendly. You can design and build audio, video ads at the click of a few buttons. And again, you don't need massive budgets to get going. We're going to talk about podcasts in a second, and why I think great content is going to be crucial in introducing new platforms and driving new marketing channels. But I think Spotify is certainly one to watch. Similarly, in terms of talking to new audiences, reaching out to new generations, I think Reddit is an interesting option in terms of running promoted ads, or finding the right Reddit groups to join and talk about your cause, talk about your events, talk about different ways that this community can engage with your audiences. And again, alongside Spotify, an interesting new channel and platform I think the sector will start to take advantage of. Next, thinking about building out your communities with younger audiences. So the two platforms that I find most interesting for this work are Discord and Twitch. So Discord, for those that don't know, is a messaging and community building application that really centers around the gaming and geek culture audiences. This is an example from Special Effect, which is a charity that's really focused on gaming and live streaming. A couple of other examples that I really like are Cats Protection as well. What they've done here is they've really cleverly and successfully built audiences using the language and tone of voice that their supporters would expect to see on Discord. And similarly, Twitch, the live streaming platform, has been utilized by Special Effect to bring together their live stream influencers and their fundraising audiences. So you'll see the example on this Twitch stream. The one in the middle, the Chicken for Charity example, had over 64,000 views a couple of months ago. And Special Effects really have started to harness channels like Twitch and Discord to be able to speak to younger audiences, to be able to get their message across in different ways. I mentioned podcasts a moment ago when we spoke about Spotify, and I think this is something that the sector as a whole is really starting to take notice of now. More and more charities are recording and releasing their own podcasts. This example comes from colleagues at Marie Curie. They have a famous face come along every edition to talk about their experience of grief. It's a wonderful podcast, but what we're starting to see is charities find more and more interesting ways to bring their cause into podcasts as a format. And again, I think it's an interesting new addition to creative content that the sector is harnessing at the moment. Next, I'd just like to talk about video more generally. So these examples all come from Breast Cancer Now, who I think are one of the best at this. They use their Facebook Live streams to bring along different experts, different nurses to talk about different ideas that would be useful to their beneficiaries. So a couple of examples here are makeup and beauty tips for during and after breast cancer treatment. I think it's a really lovely example of how you can harness video at the moment and live stream it to your audiences. Again, this doesn't have to be done with massive budgets. You know, we've all joined a live stream this morning. There are ways to do this for relatively little money to be able to reach your audiences in new and more interesting ways. And then lastly, the rise and power of influencers at the moment, I think it has really helped a number of charities during this period of disruption. This example comes from Cats Protection, who I mentioned earlier. Cats Protection really do get the new channels that have come to market, and they've been harnessing the power of influencers, people like Gab Smulders here, who has over 155,000 followers on Twitter, 140,000 followers on Twitch. Gab ran a live stream for the charity and raised over £12,000 from live streaming to her audiences. Just another really lovely example of how this new generation of content, a new generation of influencer can help you reach new people. So I did say I was going to run through that very quickly. So those top 5 trends, again, the things that interest me most about 2021 from a digital perspective are, again, virtual events and how I think you should be planning and budgeting for them to be here to stay throughout this year and beyond. That idea of a circular Facebook challenge, that circular journey on Facebook, how can you and your cause be harnessing that at the moment? We're seeing a number of organizations raise 6 figures from very low spends through those circular journeys. Thirdly, we talked about how digital may be replacing physical cash and engagement in the marketplace. Then we went on and spoke about those generational shifts in giving, and are we conscious of the younger generations coming up and the channels that they're interested in. And then lastly, I talked about a few new ideas around content creation, different platforms and channels that you and your charities could and should be using over the year ahead. So before we move on to questions, just my contact details. I'm very aware that I spoke about a lot of different things there, and you may have a desire to speak about one of them in more detail. So there's my email, and I'm Innovation Matt on Twitter, and I'd love to pick up any one of those 5 conversations with you all at a future point. So questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Matt. That was great, and you've generated lots of questions here. So I'll do my best to get through them all as quickly as possible, if that's okay. So first one, Matt, is from Jessica. So she's asked, if you're creating a group for a challenge, what are you doing in the group post event? Are you closing them down? In which case, how do you get these members to like your page / stay in touch?
It's a really great question, because I am worried about the kind of they're a really effective model for engaging people at speed and raising money at speed, but they do feel like they're quite a finite resource. So the example that I gave from Brain Tumor Research, where I'm currently doing my interim, we did a Santa Dash event in December, and we've got a Walk 10,000 Steps event coming up in February. And what we've done to try and move people across is let them know about, in the Santa Dash group, let them know about the new activity, get them to obviously like the main page as well, and to shift across. We're currently planning on doing a Facebook challenge sort of every 2 to 3 months and trying to move people along. We expect that each challenge will have a high percentage of new people, that we're not going to be converting a lot of warm across each challenge, but we have been seeing a decent number move across, somewhere between sort of 10 to 15% move across from the Santa Dash to the new event. So yes, I agree, it is a challenge. It is one of the downsides of the model, but thinking about how you can capture people's details through things like merchandise and thank you letters and certificates and medals, capturing people's details, contact details, and then getting it onto your CRM that way is an effective way to keep that relationship.
Fantastic, thank you. Next question, Matt. So if your Facebook audience is small, will this be a massive barrier to the potential success of your campaign?
Great question again. So the power of this model is starting the journey with the Facebook ad, and so creating your Facebook group with a set of new people, with a new audience in effect. So even if you only have, let's say, £100 to £200 in terms of spend to be able to generate those ads, the key to the model is starting with adverts, and not starting with your warm audiences, because it's really difficult to get them to move from your page into a group. The key is to start with the Facebook ad. And again, not everybody is going to have tens of thousands of pounds to spend on that, but even a few £100 would be enough to get that going, to build the size group that you'd need to make it successful.
Fantastic, thank you. And you mentioned merchandise, Matt. So one of the questions is, with the merchandise, do they only get this if they sign up? And what are the commitments in order to get the t-shirts, whistle, etc.?
Yeah, so we've applied different rules, and I think we're gonna test different ways of doing this. So at the moment, for the event that we've got coming up in February, a supporter only gets merchandise if they join the group, set up a fundraiser, and within that fundraiser commit to our fundraising threshold, which I believe at the moment is £100. So once they've both committed to joining the group, setting up the fundraiser, and have set themselves a target, that's when they kind of are able to receive the merchandise. We certainly wouldn't test giving everybody that ever joined the group the merchandise, because it just wouldn't be an effective use of time or spend. But we have considered lowering or raising that fundraising amount based on the activity.
Fantastic. And a great question here from Howard. He says, does the merchandise have to be physical? And are there any good examples of virtual rewards incentives?
Love that question, because at the moment, getting physical merchandise out is really difficult. We thought the power of receiving something in the post was important for us, because it blends the digital and the physical, and a lot of our data suggests that where you're able to do that, it makes it more real and tangible, and forges a closer connection between the supporter and the cause. We have been playing around with virtual medals, with virtual certificates, with receiving with receiving exclusive content. So one idea we've got that we're potentially going to use is receiving a thank you message from a beneficiary, so a video that's bespoke to to each fundraiser. So I do think there are some clever things you could do digitally, because I am aware how difficult it is to fulfill merchandise at the moment. But for us, it was really important that we did something physical, that supporters did get something.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt. So Esther's asking, how much should the organisation account be posting on the Facebook group, or should you allow the members and community to post their stories and build their own community?
Great question. So we found that the power of the group is that people do just want to share their stories about whether or not they're currently whether they or a family member currently have a brain tumor, or in effect if they're taking part in the event in memory of someone. We find it's the floodgate effect of people just wanting to share their stories. That has just happened organically. We've been trying to have a member of staff or a volunteer in the group pretty much at all points where possible, and that's been difficult with rotoring, particularly in the evenings and weekends, because we do find the more we're responding to people's comments, the more we're engaging in conversation and liking things. It's not so much that we as a charity have to be putting in constant messages, it's more building that conversation and building the fact that they know that the organization's there and responding, and that's proved dividends. The more of that engagement that we've done, the better the fundraising has been. And we've been blown away by how much we've raised before the events even started. It doesn't begin until February 1st, and we're probably looking to have raised 6 figures before the event even starts.
Wow, it's fantastic. Brilliant. So Matt, around the Facebook challenge, is it a specific button you put on your Facebook page, or in terms of, is it a specific tool on Facebook that you use to develop it?
So I would encourage. So one kind of takeaway for everybody is to go check out the guys at Give Panel. So Give Panel, another company that a number of UK charities are now working with, to kind of bridge the gap between the power of Facebook, but then not necessarily having all of the customer service and charity support that someone like Just Giving gives. Give Panel really kind of slot in and do that. So we've been following the Give Panel principles that I kind of showed on screen in that kind of circular journey. So that's what I'd encourage people to do, is to go speak to those guys, because they can really help there. For us, it's building the Facebook ads, building the Facebook group, driving people from the ads to the group, and the other steps, as I laid out, will obviously be in the slides to follow. Hopefully that slide's a really helpful kind of takeaway for everybody. They can just kind of follow those steps, but I would encourage people to speak to the guys at Give Panel for sure.
Fantastic. And Matt, could you repeat the 2 contactless payment providers that you mentioned as well?
Absolutely. So Goodbox, Goodbox and Liberty Pay are the two providers that I've worked with, and have, as I said, models of kind of various size, from handheld to fixed terminals. I saw that we had a few museums on the call, and I know that a number of museums and art galleries have started to use fixed terminals at entrances and exits. So yeah, that's Goodbox and Liberty Pay.
Fantastic, thank you. And on the point of keeping brand and cause out of the market and saving it for the stewardship, what does that realistically mean for an ongoing connection to a charity and their motivations to stay with you and do more? Is there any kind of stats on this, on an ongoing engagement for that kind of model?
That's a tremendous question, and is one of my concerns around it all, is that, are we in this moment where it's working really, really well for us, but it's kind of almost like a quick cash grab, to be honest, to put it quite bluntly, and what does that mean for long-term engagement and community building? Such a great question. I think we're probably too close to the test events that have been running throughout 2020 and into this year to really know what kind of relationship we're building with people. I know that the percentage, so we're looking at a conversion rate at the moment from those that join the group to those that set up a fundraising page. I think it's somewhere around 30% is going from group to creating the page at the moment. And we're finding that those that do create their fundraisers and then give us their contact details to be able to receive the merchandise, to be able to receive the thanking, we're very confident that we're going to be able to build an ongoing relationship with those people. They'll be receiving our e-newsletter, they'll be receiving stuff in the future. As for everybody else that stays in the group, that kind of is almost kind of not engaging in the full way, that's the point that I'm most interested in discovering. Do they stay with the charity? Do they like the page? Do they continue to join groups and at some point go on to take part in something? That's going to be really difficult to measure because of the data that we get from Facebook, but something that we're trying to anecdotally try and prove. I think we probably need 3 or 4 of these challenges to happen before we really know how that plays out.
Brilliant. And so this next question is around virtual events. There's a couple of parts to this one, Matt, so happy to repeat if need be. Should there be registration fees for online events, or should it always be free? And how are organizations using kind of the incentive to sign up and kind of reach their fundraising goals? And the third part to that question is what type of incentives work for virtual events best?
Great questions. So can you just repeat the first part? I've jotted down the other 2.
Should there be a registration fee for online events?
Thank you. In my opinion, that's something that you can be testing, A/B testing, out of the gate to sort of get a sense of how your supporter base are responding to it. The stats that I've seen are that where you put that financial barrier to entry, you reduce the conversion rate from advert to sign up, but you increase the conversion rate from sign up to fundraiser. So it's kind of where do you want to lose people in that funnel? Would you rather drive more people from your advert to your registration and therefore have their data and be able to speak to them about converting to fundraising? Or would you rather a higher quality group of people go through that first point? Because I think if you put a £5, £10 entry fee on a virtual event, you're likely to immediately exclude people who may have been lukewarm to the idea and may not have necessarily been as serious to it, but you'll know you've got a significant higher level of commitment to those that kind of go through. So, I mean, the virtual event point, the Facebook challenge point, they kind of do all start to merge together for me in terms of merchandise. People just love getting swag in the post, whether that's t-shirts or medals, or I think we're at the point now where we need to start coming up with some more creative and interesting ideas. Christmas gave us an interesting one because we're able to do Santa hats. We're able to do Christmassy things. I think trying to think outside the box now is important. I'm very aware that some of our supporters are getting the same t-shirt, the same medal if they're doing multiple things, and starting to think differently about merchandise. It works. It just does. I think, like I said before, it makes it real for people. People love wearing a t-shirt when they're out on their one walk of the day. People love getting their kind of medals and showing them off behind them on their Zoom meetings. So merchandise is really important. Did I cover every point there?
Yes, just double checking. That's all covered.
They're all different things. I think I think we should all be really happy to test and play around with, and not be set in stone that this challenge, this is the stewardship journey for it and it will never change. I think being able to A/B test different points of that journey and learn as you go should be encouraged.
Fantastic, thank you. And you mentioned about the generational shift. So what is the source of the generational shift that you've given, if that's okay? So what date range of this generation, what date range of this generation shift, as in the dates from, if that's okay?
So again, if you download that full Blackboard report, perhaps we could put it in the notes, the different downloads that I've pointed to throughout the presentation. I can send across to you guys to share, because Blackboard obviously do break it down. The actual age ranges for the generations causes quite a lot of conflict, because there's different appreciations of it all. But for me, the Gen Y millennial generation, I'm just about on the edge of it. I turned 37 in a fortnight. I'm just on the older end of millennial before it ticks into Generation X. Then you've obviously got that Generation X generation who are now in their 40s and 50s. who have far more disposable cash than I think the sector really thinks about, and the Generation X's are engaging on completely different channels and in completely different ways. I just don't think enough is, particularly that generation, has been enough to think about them coming in and replacing the baby boomers, replacing the retired generations. Going to be need to speaking to them in very different ways on very different channels.
Brilliant. And so someone's mentioned here, so does the offer of merchandise not compromise the user's ability for gift aid, as in they're not supposed to get anything in return for their donation?
That's a really interesting question. So we're using a peer-to-peer model on Facebook. So other people are donating to their fundraising pages. So the supporter themselves is not donating directly to the charity, if you know. It's the Just Giving model of friends and family and colleagues donating, ticking yes, they're a UK taxpayer, and being able to claim gift aid on that donation to the supporter. The supporter themselves are receiving the merchandise, the thank you letters and certificates, as a way to congratulate and thank them for doing it. So that for me is how that gift aid model works.
Great. And we kind of touched on this around the fees for events, but someone's just mentioned here optional registration fees and suggested donations. Do you think that's a lot better than a set amount? And do you think it will cause any additional barriers?
Again, something I would be really happy and willing to test if I was the questioner. I think anything that you put in the way on a digital kind of journey is just going to be a barrier, unless it's a really simple email address. Yes, tell me more. Everything becomes a barrier, you know. So I think having optional entry fee is a really interesting one, because that's somewhere between the two, and it's obviously won't be as much of a barrier as you must give us £10 to proceed, you know, into the event. I like suggested fundraising totals. I think it's an effective tool to use, particularly for virtual events, and being able to play around with your entry fee and suggested totals a really interesting way to do it. So if you go pay a £20 entry fee and you don't necessarily have to fundraise, or enter for free and raise £100, different ways you can approach it that I've seen.
Fantastic, brilliant. And you spoke about Spotify. So one of the questions is around what is the reporting like within Spotify? So a lot of people weren't aware that you could actually use Spotify in that way without a third-party advertising agency setting it up. Is it something you can do directly?
You can do it directly. I caused myself a lot of pain in November last year learning how to do it. It is possible. I would say that the data that you get back at the moment is kind of patchy at best. It reminds me a lot of when Facebook first started their fundraising function, and the data that you got back in those heady days of 2017 was not good, and it has improved massively. Spotify have identified podcasts in particular as a real area for growth, and why I think it's an interesting move for our sector to start thinking about advertising either side of a podcast. It's because you can specifically target a running podcast with a running virtual event. You could specifically target a cooking podcast, you know, with a bake-off style event. So yes, it is possible to do yourself. It does take a little bit of learning to kind of work out. And again, it's obviously something that you need to work with colleagues in your marketing team if you have one. It's probably the kind of thing that getting agency support with would be beneficial, because it's a lot of work to try and teach yourself to do it. But if you're working at an organization with a smaller team, it's something that I'd encourage checking out.
Is it quite expensive?
Again, it's what have you got to spend, like with Facebook advertising, like with Google advertising, you know, it's bang for your buck, really. Yeah. and it's proportional.
Right. And then you mentioned about Reddit, the platform Reddit, is that right?
Yes.
If that's worth exploring, would you say Q&A platform Quora, I think is how it's pronounced, is similarly worth exploring?
Yeah, I think any of those kind of out of the box, you know, community building platforms are now really worth having to think about. I'd throw Discord on that list as well, that we talked about in the slides. If you're building out an event or a particular fundraising stream, and you want to target a specific audience, it's well worth checking out Reddit, Quora, Discord to sort of see if there are already groups there talking about your area of interest. diving in there and building a conversation, not dissimilar to how you build that out in a Facebook group. It's just, I think, another tool that we can add to our armory.
Fantastic. And next question is around Facebook giving. So how do you see the value exchange campaigns developing over the next few years?
Love that question. I could do a whole hour on talking about lead generation through Facebook and seeing that stuff. I think back to the Friends of the Earth Save the Bees campaign as just being the absolute case study for when it comes to kind of that kind of work. And obviously their model was, in exchange for your data and your donation, we'll send you a packet of wildflower seeds to be able to plant in your garden and attract the bee population. I see that stuff on Facebook. Again, kind of tying it back to the merchandise idea, I'm starting to see a lot of copycat, a lot of the same ideas bubbling up. I'd really like to see causes come up with value exchanges that really have their cause kind of front and center. And there's been a lot of tote bags of late. There's been a lot of kind of petitions and petitions being a really interesting model in terms of engaging there. But are we able to come up with that really awesome connection that Friends of the Earth came up with the Save the Bees and the seeds? Can you come up with that idea for your cause and think about that value exchange kind of program on Facebook? Petitions will always be really effective, and I think will continue to be really powerful. I hope that answered the question, but again, we should do another one just on that later on in the year.
I think so. It's really interesting. So some great questions here. So we don't have too much time, but hopefully you can get through at least a couple more if that's okay. So good question here. Any examples of charities trying to monetize their podcasts, or is it just promoting their own events appeals, or are any attracting commercial advertising?
Very, very, very interesting question, and ties back to the Spotify point as well. Because at what point do we start to see a rival charity advertise around a competitor's podcast? It's probably just a matter of time. Yeah. I think from what I've heard in talking to colleagues, obviously in quite early days when it comes to podcasts, a few charities have had them for a couple of years, but we're only really starting to see them grow their audiences now. Yeah, I think there's an absolute opportunity to build adverts at the beginning and end of podcast content, whether that's speaking about whether it's promoting legacies or whether it's promoting an event coming up. I absolutely see that happening, and I'm sure there are conversations happening between organizations and their corporate partners like right now, because the synergy and connections that you could build with a corporate partner advertising their philanthropic work with the organization before the podcast, but then very much paying for that content, I think is really interesting, and just the next natural evolution of that format.
Fantastic, brilliant, thank you. No, that answers a couple of questions there. There's quite a lot of interest around the podcast side, Matt, so certainly something to look out for.
Yeah. I think everyone and their dog has a podcast now. I do one with my friends that about 12 people listen to.
all worth it though, right, Matt? So we've probably got time for just one more quick question, if that's okay. So are there any particular reasons you choose Facebook compared to other platforms? Was it just to make it all a very fluid journey?
So the Facebook challenge in specific, so that model, that circular kind of 3-step model that we talked about, the principles that we've learned from GivePanel, really can only happen on Facebook right now. There's not other options that could replicate the power and scale that's possible there, due to the sheer numbers of people on Facebook, but secondly, also just because of how it's set up and the niche in the market that GivePanel have been able to carve for themselves. It truly is kind of a one-off opportunity. It's not something that you could do on LinkedIn or even on Instagram kind of at the moment. That ad to Facebook group to fundraiser really does only sit there at the moment. It's because you've got in effect a trapped audience that you can push through that journey. It's not possible on other platforms at the moment.
Fantastic. And I think we'll squeeze one more in because there's an interesting, if that's okay, interesting question here, Matt. So our charity has been so successful with fundraising on Facebook and raised over £1 million, which is great. But our charity has a very few fundraisers, meaning there is so much burnout around toll. So time and leave. So how can you mitigate this and make sure that staff are getting away from the screen they deserve when the rest of the fundraising is underperforming this year?
It's such a good question, and it's like they've been shadowing me this week because it's been the centerpiece of a lot of meetings this week. It's really, really hard because when you've got a Facebook challenge like the one we've got with 10,000 steps working really, really well, it's kind of a gift and a curse because you see it blow up, and you know the more time and effort that you put into it, the bigger the momentum, the more people you'll be talking to, the more money you'll be raising. We've built a rota system, and now our team is working weird hours throughout the week and weekend, but we're giving people mornings off, lunchtimes off to be able to make it work around that. We're also trying to utilize as much volunteer capacity as we can. And I know that will be like a hot button issue for a lot of charities, won't necessarily be happy sharing their Facebook logins with volunteers. But we just felt it was needed to be able to stay on top of it all and to be able to maximize the impact of it. It is a real challenge. It can easily lead to burnout. I think all of our work-life balances at the moment are really hard to manage. But I think putting together a plan, a rota, being honest and transparent with your staff. For me, I've just made it the priority for my team. We're kind of parking a few other things and we'll come back to them in February and March. We just know we're in the middle of a moment. We've got lightning in a bottle and we really, really want to go with it. So we've made it that priority.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Matt. That was really great. And apologies to everyone for not being able to get through all the questions because there was so many, Matt. So hopefully we'll hand some over and maybe can look at those at a later date if that's okay.
Happy to.
Thank you so much. And I'll hand back over to Neil.
Thank you so much, Matt, for an excellent session. Such a concise roundup of the trends and excellent advice, pointers, opportunities, the cashless society and generational change and these new platforms. Thank you so much for such a great start to 221 First Thursdays. Thank you once again, First Thursday team, for all the excellent work. Thank you, Stephen, for facilitating and all the guys in the back room putting on the production today. Thank you once again to our sponsors, Eden Brown, and to all of you for devoting time and the excellent questions this morning. Next month, 4th of February, First Thursday session will be on individual giving, when we'll have a panel session. Thank you all once again. May I wish you a happy new year and hope that it's much, much better than the past one. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.